Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a stack of sources that take us right into, well, one of the most fascinating and, frankly, high-pressure places in the ancient world, the law courts of classical Athens.
Yeah, and we're digging into this real paradox,
Yeah.
something right at the core of Athenian democracy.
Exactly. This tension between the ideal and, well, the reality on the ground.
Because the Athenian system, it was founded on this pretty radical idea.
Mm-hmm.
Every single male citizen, didn't matter if he was rich, poor, educated, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
he had to stand up in court before a huge jury and speak for himself. He was his own lawyer.
That was the ideal, right? Pure, direct citizen
The
justice.
purest form they could imagine.
But the stakes, they were just enormous. This wasn't, arguing a parking ticket.
Not at all.
If you were a citizen facing a lawsuit, you could lose everything. Your property, your political rights, sometimes even your life. So just imagine yourself in that spot. Maybe you're a reasonably successful farmer and you're up against some guy who's super educated, wealthy, knows how to talk.
Someone with rhetorical training.
Right. And you might have the truth on your side completely. But if you stammer or you look nervous or you just can't connect with that jury,
You're done for.
yeah, the very system that's supposed to empower you could absolutely crush you.
Precisely. And that system, the one that actually forbade professional lawyers and insisted on direct participation, well, it immediately created this huge need for rhetorical skill.
A vacuum almost.
A huge vacuum.
Yeah.
The pressure to perform was immense, and if you didn't have the skills, well, it was almost a disaster.
Which leads us straight to our main subject today, the logographers.
Ah, yes. The logographers.
These were the sort of hidden professionals, the ghostwriters operating just outside the legal lines, but really shaping justice from behind the scenes.
They were crafting these perfect, persuasive legal arguments for clients who weren't allowed to hire an actual lawyer. They became these unacknowledged power brokers in Athens.
So our mission today for this deep dive is to figure out how these masters of persuasion actually work.
Exactly. Well, look at the speeches that survived, especially from someone like Lysias, whose work is just incredibly elegant, but also deceptively simple.
And see what they tell us about the real Athenian law, which sounds like it was volatile, messy, deeply personal.
Oh, absolutely. Far from that neat, tidy vision of pure democratic equality we sometimes imagine.
Okay, let's get into it. We probably need to start with the structure of the court itself, right? Because the sheer scale seems critical.
It's fundamental. You have to grasp the scale to understand the strategy. Forget, the quiet, formal courtrooms we see on TV.
Yeah.
Athenian courts were enormous. They were built for unpredictability almost, and definitely for maximum democratic inclusion.
Designed to be too big to corrupt, maybe.
That was definitely part of the thinking. Too big to easily bribe, too big for one person to dominate. The judicial machinery involved was just staggering.
How staggering are we talking?
Every year, they selected 6,000 citizens by lot. 6,000, all over 30 years old. These were the potential jurors, the decasts.
6,000 out of the whole citizen body.
Yeah, that's maybe a fifth of all eligible male citizens at the time. A huge chunk of the population directly involved in the justice system each year.
Wow. Okay, so you have this pool of 6,000. How did they actually end up on a specific trial?
They were organized into these large panels, decuries they were called. For a serious public case, the kind we have records for, you typically see a jury of 501 people.
501, not 500.
501, always an odd number to prevent ties. And for really high-stakes political trials, it could be even bigger, maybe 1,000, even 1,500 jurors.
Good grief. The idea being that a majority decision from that many people had to be legitimate.
That was the aim. And like you said, it made bribery incredibly difficult and expensive. Who could afford to influence hundreds of people?
And how did they try to control bias? Because with that many people, you'd still worry about factions or pressure.
They went to extraordinary lengths, actually. It wasn't like today where a judge might be assigned weeks in advance. In Athens, they tried to ensure nobody knew who would be judging a specific case until the very last minute.
How did they manage that randomization?
It was mainly the job of 6 junior archons, the thesmothetes. They oversaw this complex lottery system. Sometimes they use these sophisticated allotment machines, marble devices called claroteria.
Like a bingo machine for justice.
Sort of, but with higher stakes. These machines would determine purely by lot which jury panels would sit that day and which magistrate they'd serve under. You didn't just report to courtroom B.
No,
you showed up at a central location, and the lot, the claros, decided where you went and what case you'd hear.
So you couldn't possibly lobby or pressure the specific jurors beforehand. because you didn't know who they'd be.
Exactly. Your only option was raw persuasion, right then and there, in front of 501 anonymous faces.
The pressure must have been immense, just standing there.
Unbelievable. And the actual court procedure only amplified that pressure. Once that huge jury was seated, it was almost all about the spoken word.
The speeches.
The speeches were the absolute core. The plaintiff spoke, then the defendant spoke. That was the heart of the trial.
And this brings us to something crucial, I think, especially for the logographers. Time.
Oh, absolutely critical. Time was strictly controlled using a water clock, the clepsydra.
The water clock, right. How much time did they actually get?
It varied. Depends on the case type, the seriousness. For minor private suits, it might be incredibly short, maybe only an hour total for both sides combined.
An hour? That's nothing.
It's incredibly tight. For major public cases, maybe 2 or 3 hours total. So if you're the defendant, you might have, 20 minutes, half an hour maybe, to save your life or your entire fortune.
Wow.
And when that water ran out, your chance was gone. Finished.
So every single word had to count. No rambling, no tangents.
Zero room for error. You couldn't just lay out all the facts. You had to pick the most impactful ones, the most persuasive ones, the ones that fit the time. It forced a certain kind of rhetoric.
A very distilled, high-impact rhetoric.
Precisely. Yeah. After the timed speeches, the judges, the casts, could ask questions. And evidence-written documents, laws, witness statements, sworn under oath, was presented and read out.
How long did that part take?
The sources suggest that for complex cases, collecting evidence and deliberations could stretch things out, maybe up to 3 days in total. But the crucial speaking part, the bit where you made your case, that was compressed, very compressed.
And the jurors, the dechasts, they were actually paid for doing this?
Yes, and that's crucial. They got a regular payment after each day they served. It wasn't a huge amount, but it became standard practice, really solidified around the time of Pericles.
Why was the payment so important?
Because it meant poorer citizens, working class, farmers, artisans, could actually afford to take time off work and participate. It kept the juries genuinely democratic in their makeup, not just filled with wealthy men of leisure.
So it sounds democratic in structure, huge juries, random selection, payment for service. But then there's this other paradox. No professional prosecutors.
None at all. The whole system ran on individual initiative. The state didn't have, a district attorney's office.
So if someone wronged you?
It was entirely up to you, the private citizen. You had to decide to prosecute, you had to fund it, you had to manage the whole thing. The state just provided the court and the jury.
But surely that created a massive hurdle for ordinary people.
Absolutely. A huge, unavoidable financial barrier. Launching a major prosecution, you had to gather evidence, maybe find people willing to testify, potentially get advice on your speech.
Like from a logographer.
Exactly. All of that costs time and money, significant resources. So the cases we actually have speeches for, they mostly involve conflicts between people who had at least some means. Moderate resources, as the source puts it.
The wealthy could just afford a better fight.
They could afford a more robust case, yes. They could hire the best secret help. They could endure a longer process. They could probably bring more social pressure to bear through their networks.
So despite the democratic setup, the courts could feel like a playground for the elite.
And the speakers knew it. You often see them in the speeches directly pleading with the jury not to favor the rich opponent. They'll say things like, "Don't be swayed by his wealth, judge the facts."
Which implies they feared the jury would be swayed by wealth.
It suggests that judicial bias, or at least the perception of it, was a real concern. The sheer imbalance of resources made it tough for an ordinary person to truly compete on a level playing field.
Which, again, just underlines why someone might desperately need a logographer to try and level that playing field rhetorically.
It made them almost essential for anyone facing a powerful opponent.
Okay, one last bit on procedure before we move on. How did the 501 jurors actually vote? Was it secret ballot? Show of hands?
It's a fascinating system, kind of open, but also anonymous at the moment of voting. The die cast would usually be given 2 voting tokens. These could be pebbles or often specially marked bronze discs.
2 discs, one for each side?
Typically, yeah. One solid, one hollow, representing conviction and acquittal, or maybe different colors. They'd approach 2 urns. One urn was for casting the decisive vote. The other was for discarding the unused token.
So you drop the one you want to count into urn A and the other into urn B.
Something like that. The key was you held both tokens, often concealing which was which in your hand, and then drop them simultaneously or near simultaneously into the respective urns. So your neighbors couldn't necessarily see exactly which token went where at the moment of truth.
Clever. So individually anonymous, but collectively verifiable?
Exactly. Then the officials would empty the main urn and count the tokens openly. Majority ruled. It was a powerful, physical act of democratic participation for each juror.
That really grounds the whole process. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. You mentioned the system was personal. Let's talk about litigation as, well, a feud.
Yeah, that's not overstating it. Once you strip away the formal procedures, the reality of Athenian justice often felt like personal vendetta dressed up in legal robes.
So deciding to sue someone wasn't just about, is the law on my side?
Often, no. It was a deeply strategic decision. You had to weigh your resources against your opponents. You had to think about their social standing, their political connections, their network.
Compared to yours.
Compared to yours, it was less a dry legal calculation and more like planning a campaign in a long-running rivalry.
It sounded like managed warfare almost, using the courts as a weapon.
That's a good way to put it. Litigation was very closely tied to ideas of feud and vengeance. It was seen, quite openly sometimes, as an instrument for getting back at someone, for mortal retribution. And the advice people got reflected this. The sources talk about advising litigants, basically, don't bite off more than you can chew. Avoid taking on a fight you can't actually win or survive winning.
Survive winning? What do you mean?
I mean, even if you win the court case, you might provoke such a furious backlash from the loser and their supporters that your life becomes hell. Or worse.
That's chilling. Is there a concrete example of this kind of calculation?
Yes, there's a famous bit of advice given to a man named Ariston. He was thinking about bringing a capital charge, aiming for the death penalty against an enemy named Conan.
Okay.
His advisors strongly warned him off. They said pursuing a capital case would unleash all-out warfare. Meaning Conan and his faction would retaliate with everything they had. Politically, socially, maybe even physically. The implication was clear. Ariston simply didn't have the deep pockets or the powerful network needed to withstand that kind of total conflict.
So they told him to aim low.
Exactly. Pursue a lesser charge. Maybe sue for damages. Something manageable. Something where winning wouldn't necessarily mean complete social destruction afterwards.
So the logographer, or whoever was advising him, wasn't just thinking about legal points. They were acting like a political strategist, a risk manager.
That's precisely it. Legal advice was strategic advice on managing social and political risk. Winning the verdict was only part one. Surviving the consequences was part two.
And the motivation behind launching these risky endeavors was often intensely personal, you said. Vengeance.
Explicitly so, sometimes. We see this incredibly clearly in one of Lysias' speeches, his prosecution of a man named Agoratus.
Agoratus, who was he?
He was an ex-slave, apparently, who had acted as an informer during the brutal rule of the 30 tyrants, leading to the arrest and execution of several citizens.
Okay, a pretty hated figure, presumably.
Extremely. And the speaker in Lysias' speech doesn't hide his motives. He openly tells the jury he's prosecuting Agoratus not just for the good of the city, but to fulfill a sacred duty of vengeance.
For whom?
For his kinsman. His sister's husband, a man named Dionysiodorus, who was killed directly because Agoratus informed on him.
That's incredibly direct, almost like something from a tragedy.
It really is. The speaker recounts how Dionysiodorus, as he was dying, actually charged his pregnant wife and his relatives, including the speaker, to take revenge on the man responsible for his death.
Wow.
So for this Athenian citizen, bringing Agoratus to court wasn't just civic duty. It was a deeply personal, almost religious obligation to his family, to the memory of the dead. The lawsuit was the mechanism for fulfilling that deathbed vow.
I see. So the logographer's task here wasn't just about proving Agoratus's guilt under the law. It was about framing the entire prosecution as this necessary, morally righteous act of vengeance.
Exactly. Turning a legal charge into something the jury felt almost duty-bound to support on a deep ethical level.
And in this supercharged, personal, feud-driven environment, what about witnesses? We rely on witnesses for facts today. Was it the same?
Not really. There was a huge credibility problem with witnesses in Athens. The baseline assumption, often, was that witnesses were probably biased, if not outright lying.
Why so much suspicion? Weren't oaths important?
Oaths were important, but the suspicion came from loyalty. People assumed witnesses testified out of allegiance to their friends or hostility to their enemies. Objective, neutral testimony wasn't really the expectation.
So what was the point of calling witnesses then?
It was primarily about demonstrating support.
Yeah.
Your witnesses showed the jury the extent of your network. Look at all these respectable friends and family members who stand by me. It was character testimony by proxy.
So it wasn't, I saw X happen, but I support this man, therefore he is credible.
That was a huge part of it. Their presence bolstered your credibility more than establishing specific facts. It was about showing your social standing and solidarity. More political token than objective data provider.
The currency was your network, not necessarily the hard evidence.
In many ways, yes. And speakers had to constantly navigate this suspicion. There's a great example from the orator Aeschines.
Yeah.
He's making his case, and he makes a point of saying he's calling witnesses who are actually friends of his opponent, not his own friends or some random neutral parties,
Why would he do that?
to try and short-circuit the jury's suspicion. See, he's saying, even my enemy's friends support my version of events. It was a rhetorical move to claim impartiality because these witnesses weren't part of his expected circle of support.
That tells you how deeply ingrained the suspicion was. Testimony from your own friends was automatically discounted.
Exactly. Or testimony from your opponent's known enemies. The logographer had to think strategically about who testified almost as much as what they said.
It paints a picture of a justice system run by this massive democratic jury, but one that was deeply skeptical, expected manipulation, and judged the person, their character, their network as much as, or maybe even more than, the alleged crime itself.
Which brings us right back to the logographer.
Right, because in that kind of environment, huge jury, intense pressure, short time limits, skepticism everywhere, emphasis on character, the average citizen, the one who wasn't a natural speaker, was completely outmatched.
Utterly doomed. The democratic ideal created this performance requirement, but didn't provide the tools. That vacuum demanded the secret help of an expert.
The hidden hand was needed.
Absolutely. Given the tight timing from the clepsydra and the need for really sophisticated, persuasive arguments, anyone lacking that natural gift or training had little choice but to secretly hire a logographer.
To write the whole thing.
Often, yes. The entire speech tailored down to the specific arguments, the emotional appeals, the right tone.
And the logographer's greatest trick, the thing that made them worth the risk and the money, wasn't just writing a good speech.
No, the real magic was ethopoeia.
Ethopoeia, crafting character, right.
Precisely. Making the speech sound like it genuinely came from the client. Logographers, especially someone like Lysias, were masters of this. They had to write arguments that perfectly fit the assumed personality, the social standing, the likely education level of the person delivering it.
So a speech for a gruff farmer had to sound different from one for a smooth merchant.
Completely different. It absolutely could not sound like it was written by some highly educated, slick professional rhetorician. That would be fatal.
But hang on, if you have these famous logographers like Lysias writing lots of speeches, wouldn't the jury start to recognize their style? Wouldn't they think, this sounds like Lysias again?
That's a really sharp question, and it's probably why Lysias was so successful and admired. His particular genius was for a style that was incredibly plain, clear, almost simple on the surface.
Deceptively simple?
Exactly. It was a kind of pure, unadorned Attic Greek. It sounded like the natural, straightforward talk of an honest, perhaps slightly wronged, ordinary man. He mastered making the highly sophisticated sound totally unsophisticated.
So the goal was authenticity, even if it was completely manufactured.
That was the absolute key. The speech had to feel authentic and convincing, coming out of that specific client's mouth.
Because if the logographer failed at ethopoeia, if it sounded fake,
the jury wouldn't just dismiss the arguments, they'd dismiss the client for being deceitful, for pretending to be someone he wasn't, by hiring elite help he wasn't supposed to have.
A massive reputational risk.
Huge. They walked a tightrope. Now, should we look at some of the common themes and tactics these ghostwriters actually used? We can see them clearly in the speeches that survived, like those of Lysias.
Yeah, let's get into the toolkit. What was like the go-to offensive strategy?
Character assassination, without a doubt. Since the jury was judging the man as much as the case, tearing down your opponent's reputation was priority number one.
How?
Speeches are full of vicious attacks on the opponent's past behavior, their civic record, their family, anything that could make them look bad. Sometimes dragging up stuff from decades ago.
Like what?
Well, think about the famous rivalry between the orators Aeschines and Demosthenes. They were constantly attacking each other's records. Aeschines loved to remind the courts that Demosthenes had once been indicted for lipataction.
Lipataction. That's cowardice in battle. Or dodging military service.
It's specifically about deserting your post or failing to show up for duty when called. More than just general cowardice, it was a failure of a core civic duty.
And for an Athenian man, that was a major black mark.
Huge. It wasn't just a legal footnote. It was a stain on your honor, your trustworthiness as a citizen. The logographer knew that if they could successfully paint the opponent as someone guilty of lepitation, real or alleged.
It poisons the well for everything else they say.
Exactly. Makes the man rhetorically vulnerable. It strips away his claim to be an honorable citizen worthy of belief. It's a powerful weapon.
Weaponized history. Okay, besides these big political attacks, what about the everyday legal stuff logographers handled? What were most cases about?
The vast majority of surviving speeches, especially from Lysias, deal with conflicts over property and family finances.
Money and family. The big two.
Always. Inheritance disputes, arguments over debts, boundary disagreements, and especially conflicts surrounding dowries. These were the things that really hit home for the average Athenian family's security and stability.
You mentioned a dowry case earlier from the sources. Can you tell us more about that one?
Yeah, it's a really poignant case. The client is a woman trying desperately to recover her dowry, which was a significant sum, 40 minae, enough to support a family for a couple of years maybe.
Why did she need to recover it?
Because her husband's property had been confiscated by the state, leaving her and her children destitute. The entire argument crafted by the logographer revolves around the desperate plight of her children.
How so?
The speech constantly refers to the children, using the diminutive term paidia.
Paidia, meaning little children.
Yes, small children, little ones. It's a deliberate choice. It's designed to evoke maximum sympathy from the jury.
That's clear emotional manipulation.
Absolutely. It's emotional engineering. By calling them paidia, the logographer makes sure those 501 jurors are picturing helpless, vulnerable little kids. It links the dry legal claim for the 40 minae directly to the survival of innocent children.
Turning a financial dispute into a moral rescue mission.
Precisely. A tactic guaranteed to pull at the heartstrings of a jury full of fathers and grandfathers.
Okay, so family finances, character attacks. What about issues of public order? The sources mention the concept of hubris. How did logographers use that?
Hubris is a really important and complex legal concept in Athens. It's often translated just as arrogance or outrageous conduct.
But it was more specific legally.
Yes. Legally, hubris was about an act, often violent or insulting, that deliberately negated or assaulted the civic status and dignity of another person. Crucially, it was often seen as being done for the perpetrator's own gratification. It was about asserting dominance by denying someone else's rightful status.
Can you give an example of that status denial?
The classic example from the sources is hitting a free Athenian citizen with a whip.
Why was that hubris and not just assault?
Because the whip was the tool used to punish slaves. Striking a free man with it was symbolically and very powerfully treating him like a slave. It was a fundamental denial of his free status and civic dignity, a deep insult that went beyond mere physical injury.
So hubris was about protecting that crucial line between being a free citizen and not.
Exactly. Protecting the honor and status that came with citizenship. And logographers use this concept strategically. For instance, it was used to prosecute certain kinds of sexual misconduct.
How?
There's a mention of free women from the city of Athens being brought to Athens of Hubrae. That phrase means specifically for the purpose of outrageous treatment or to commit hubris against them. The charge wasn't just about the act itself, but the intention to degrade and dishonor.
So the hubris framework allowed them to seek harsher penalties for acts that violated social status and morality, not just caused physical harm.
Precisely. The punishment needed to reflect the gravity of the status violation.
It really sounds like these logographers were masters of mass persuasion, using every tool available.
Oh, they had a whole rhetorical arsenal.
Yeah.
We mentioned the emotional appeals like paidia. They also used sharp, rapid-fire rhetorical questions to corner opponents and make complex points seem simple for the big jury.
Keep the jury engaged, keep the pressure on.
And keep things moving within that tight time limit. They also cleverly leveraged legal distinctions the jurors would understand, especially around punishment.
What kind of distinctions?
A really critical one was the difference between two types of penalty, pathine and apotisai.
Okay, what do those mean?
Pathine basically means to suffer in person. It implies physical suffering, corporal punishment, or, importantly, imprisonment, which involved hardship. Apotisai means to pay restitution, usually a monetary fine.
Ah, I see. So the logographer could frame the desired outcome.
Exactly. If you wanted the harshest possible outcome for your opponent, you'd argue that they deserve to pathine to suffer personally, rather than just apotisai, pay a fine.
Especially effective against a rich opponent who could easily pay.
Absolutely. Demanding that a wealthy defendant pathine appealed directly to the jury's sense of justice and perhaps their resentment. It suggested a punishment that truly hurt, that wasn't just a cost of doing business. Imprisonment in Athens wasn't pleasant. It involved chains, poor conditions. It definitely counted as suffering.
So the logographer's success came down to this skillful blend. Crafting that believable persona with Aethopea, hitting the right emotional notes with things like patia, maybe assassinating the opponent's character, and then framing the desired penalty using powerful legal concepts like pathine.
It was a complete package. A performance meticulously designed to resonate with 501 jurors under intense time pressure,
A masterclass in strategic storytelling.
where the best story, the most convincing narrative, often carried the day, regardless of objective truth.
Which really brings us back to that core contradiction we started with, this paradox at the heart of Athenian democracy.
Yeah, they built a system designed for direct citizen participation, demanding everyone speak for themselves.
Right, equality before the law, in theory.
But in practice,
Yeah.
success often hinged entirely on getting secret professional help from these technically illegal experts, the logographers.
It reveals that Athenian justice, for all its democratic ideals, was massively influenced, maybe even dominated, and by technical, rhetorical skill.
It became a democracy where the most authentic-sounding narrative, the best performance, often won out. Maybe not always the case with the strongest factual basis.
And it paints this picture of justice that's incredibly dynamic, sophisticated, sure, but also volatile, intensely personal.
A place where lawsuits were extensions of personal feuds, where vengeance could be a primary motive, openly declared.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it, that equal access to the courts doesn't mean much without equal access to effective advocacy, something we still grapple with today.
Absolutely. And the final irony. These speeches, written by logographers like Lysias to argue specific cases, often from a biased perspective.
Yeah.
They are now our single most valuable window into the day-to-day workings of Athenian law. We rely on these artifacts of conflict to understand everything from family disputes to financial dealings to civic violence.
Which leads perfectly into our final, maybe provocative thought for today.
Okay.
If the logographer's greatest skill, that art of Aethopea, was essentially about making an inauthentic argument sound utterly real, making ghost-written brilliance sound like simple, honest speech, then what does our almost total reliance on these specific speeches tell us about how we understand the pursuit of truth in classical Athens?
That's a heavy question. It suggests we're viewing Athenian reality largely through the lens of expertly crafted spin. We're studying the performances.
We're studying the effectiveness of the logographer's art.
Exactly. If their job was, in essence, to create the most convincing possible narrative, maybe even a lie on behalf of a paying client, then 2,500 years later, are we analyzing Athenian facts or are we analyzing Athenian persuasion techniques?
The best logographer succeeded by making everyone believe his client was just a plain, honest man speaking from the heart.
And now, history studies that successful performance as evidence of reality. It's a fascinating loop. The deception, if it was deception, has become our source material.
A really compelling thought to leave things on. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.